Thanks everyone for coming up. I spotted there's a lot of advisors on there. So I suppose a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is really, we'll go over some of the science, but it's probably more about this is a great time of year to start thinking about proactively, how do we really get on the attack? Because, I always think of like who really loves a good spring, and for a lot of people who are in the, non-seasonal rain zone, we're in a really good spot. Like we've had like a really good build up. Like I'm super excited for spring coming up, but also worms and flies are super excited as well because this is game time for them. So there's some of the challenges, and this webinar is really about just kind of a bit of a recap, and then getting a head on because we're going to I always think barber's pole and flies are so interrelated in the same way that they can explode in numbers really quickly. So that it's all about getting on the attack and making sure that the snowflake doesn't turn into the avalanche. So we're going to go fast and furious, but if we miss anything, we can have plenty of questions at the end.
Hey Tim, it's B. Before you go at fast and furious, I've just had a really early question, and I think it'll be beneficial for you to answer it now for Brendan, who's asked it. They're in southwest Victoria, and they've had issues with brown fly in spring lambing ewes last year, and this is new for them. And they want to know, as you're going forward in this presentation, if the preventative action is the same as for the blowfly Lucy.
Yep, it'd be very, very similar. Yeah, I'd have to be on point, on notice on that one a little bit, but everything we're going to talk about now will be of similar ilk, and certainly the preventive chemical strategies will be really similar. So, no, good one. Thanks, Fiona.
Great.
Righto, let's go in. Let's hook in. So, what are we talking about? We run a business called For Flock's Sake. We're based in Dubbo, full time. There's 5 of us in the business now, which is super exciting. And all we do is trying to help producers grow their best sheep and make every ewe winner through health, genetics, and data. And we're having a great time doing it. I suppose, like, just to kind of set up the framework, what do we think about fly strike is that, fly strike, is most common in the breech area, but it can occur particularly around the back, neck, or the shoulders, around the pizzle of rams, wethers, and around the poll head. And you can see the kind of main ones here. Interesting enough, for those with grazing crops and are going to have a really big spring, I think we can see a lot of body striking coming up, especially for our young weaners who, if we're in high grazing crops, we're going to, maintain, quite damp and moist wool as they kind of try and walk through everything. So, we're trying to think of, we divided into 3 main categories, don't we? So we've got, covert strike was that small areas of fly strike that can be quite common, but are difficult to detect unless you're looking closely at the sheep. So when you're handling them for crutching, shearing, scanning would be another one where I've seen some fly strike. And to detect this kind of covert strike, typically you need to pull apart the wool and look closely at the skin surface. So covert fly strike can last for some weeks before advancing into early detectable or advanced fly strike during more warm and moist conditions, or sometimes, and we would have all seen this, sometimes they can resolve without any treatment. But it really depends on what kind of the environment is going forward. So the early detectable fly strike, we've all seen this. This is when we've got, we're identified those animals through some discoloring of patches of wool caused by, chewing, rubbing, not usually large wounds, but the discoloration becomes progressively darker with the more exudate protein-rich fluid or weeping. Typically in this level, sheep behave differently as they're uncomfortable and they're irritated. They'll be biting at their flank or their tail, and they'll scratch at that affected area. They'll also be stamping their feet, ducking their heads, arching their backs, and typically they'll still be within the mob. Because when they progress through the advanced fly strike, these are when the signs are more obvious. These animals become systemically unwell. The wounds are larger. There can be, a lot of infection. These are the animals that start, distinct themselves from the mob. Wounds, are wet, dark, and the maggots will be moving forward outwards to consume all the healthy tissue. So we've got the big mats of wool might be hanging or peeling off. At this point, they'll be in significant pain and they'll need, really need helping along to get them back on the attack. So it's always good to know the opposition and know our enemy. And our main enemy is the Australian sheep blowfly, Lucinia caprona. So the kind of life cycle of this enemy is made into kind of, three main life stages: the sheep stage on the sheep, the soil stage, and the adult stage. And typically, from woe to go, the life cycle takes about 17 days. So the sheep stage basically, is when we've got warm, moist, humid, and calm conditions can lead to damp, smelly wool on the sheep, which is sought after by those egg-laying females. They're looking for an ideal environment to lay their small little white eggs. The larvae, which are the creamy coloured mattocks, hatch within 12 to 24 hours of being laid. And they slowly grow, feeding on the sheep through wounds, existing strikes, and wet. Of interest here is that, when we think of when they move from, say, a fly to the egg in the early L1, Ed, our parasitologist, tells me that their mouth parts actually change dramatically from being a spongy kind of sucking on the protein-rich exudate to moving into more raspy or aggressive mouth parts, is when they're able to chew that kind of skin and flesh. Also of interest here is that as we see they emerge here, when we go on to talking about some of our chemicals a little bit later, this is where insect growth regulators, which the most famous one would be dicyclonol, or brand name would be Click. That's where they work there. They stop the ability to go on to the next life stage. Ed and I were talking about this before, and he reckons it's like wearing a really tight footy jumper. They just can't grow and can't get out of it. And eventually, they suffocate and die in that way. From there, we move on to they go through their life cycle. The maggots drop into the soil, and they kind of hang in about the first, 1 to 4 centimeters in there. So it's about a 3 to 5 day cycle. Now, soil temperatures need to be greater than 15 degrees for larvae to pupate and then emerge. So to go through that whole soil phase. So when soil temperatures are below 15 degrees, the larvae contract and they don't prepate. So they just kind of overwinter. They just kind of hang it tough until environmental conditions are ready for them to get out and rock and roll. So I took went on BOM this morning and looked at what are the soil temperatures getting around the state, and we kind of follow the list down here. So if you're Burke right now, today your soil temperature was 14.6. So this is you guys. The larvae are going, hey, it's getting ready for showtime. And I think across the state, we'll start seeing the Grafton's at 15 already. Hay got to negative 23. So obviously, there's a glitch there. But, I think Mudgee, you're at 12.4. Oh, not good to be sheep at the Air Force Base at 15. Tamworth on the tablelands, for all those people in the tablelands, you're at 13.7. So you're not far away either. 10.6 Temora, Wagga Wagga's 12.6. And then we kind of go through here, and at 12.6 at Trangie. But, I was speaking to a friend of mine today who grows Australia's second tier fibre. He's a cotton guy, and he tells me that, he would expect that by early September, we would be well into 15. And he said that temperature can go up a degree in a week when things get going. So, we're right on the cusp of a really big fly season. The soil temperature is certainly getting us close to, show day for our flies. So the adult stage, they've kind of pupated. The young flies will emerge about 11 days after being laid in a perfect condition. Usually it takes about a week for young flies to become adult flies, and then the kind of life cycle repeats. So the key part of this whole life cycle, adult females need to find a source of protein so they can reproduce. So they use carcasses and other sources of protein during this stage. They won't complete the life cycle on carcasses as the maggots need live food. So the sheep is so important in this part of the story, and we'll get to that in a minute. But sheep blowflies can use other sources of protein to survive, such as carcasses, protein-rich manure, and other animal waste, horn tips, tails, and testicles. So this is something that I'm thinking straight away, because a lot of people are landmarking right now, is that, all those kind of leftovers from landmarking really do need to get policed up to minimize the number of protein sources. So we do get secondary strike. We've got other blowfly species, the smaller, more or less Leucaena caprina is the main culprit when it comes to setting up the primary strike. But then there's a group of kind of opportunistic flies who come in and really kind of do the damage. And these are the ones that really, that secondary strike, really go quite hard. Out of interest is that when an animal dies, these are the secondary flies that actually, their maggots outcompete the primary blowfly. So that's why the carcass is, although in the early stages, right at the start, it's a source of protein, but very quickly, these other flies outcompete for that protein source. So what are the conditions required for fly strike? Well, it's the holy trinity or unholy trinity. We've got the presence of susceptible sheep. We've got the presence of flies as a result of a successful breeding and hatching event. And of course, we've got, weather that favors the blowfly and allows flies to breed and move around, as well as the weather conditions that cause wool to get wet and stay wet. So this is really important because all three conditions need to be met for fly strike to occur. So naturally, if you don't have sheep, you don't have fly strike. If you don't have flies capable of laying eggs that hatch and develop, you won't have fly strike. And if we don't get favorable weather conditions, you won't have flies, or you won't have as many flies, and you won't exacerbate the susceptibility of sheep. So they're all interconnected. So what are the actual conditions? The blowfly loves, its life cycle requires an ambient temperature between 15 and 38 degrees. Blowfly eggs, like we talked about, they overwinter in the soil, and the emergence of blowflies after winter is controlled by this temperature. So blowfly activity increases after 17 degrees and peaks between 26 and 36. After about 38 degrees, they're just like us. They get super hot, and it's not nearly as fun to get around. They become quite lethargic. So what's the practical message here is that the longer the temperatures will remain consistently higher than 15 degrees, because that also warms the soil, and lower than 38, the greater the chance of egg laying, dispersal, hatching, and therefore strike. So, we need consistent and regular rainfall that keeps the skin of the sheep moist for more than 2 days to increase the risk of fly strike, as there's less opportunity for skin to dry out compared to like one big dump. So I've just put up here regular and consistent rainfall, and here's the Dubbo forecast, and you can see here we're getting 22, 24, 24, 22, and we're getting rainfall environments. So we are right on the edge of, perfect fly conditions coming through. Flies are more active when wind speeds are below 9 kilometers. So their activity decreases when wind speeds are greater than 9 kilometers, and stop completely when 30 kilometers. And this will become important when we think about paddock selection for our most susceptible animals later on. So susceptible sheep, what are the I suppose, high risk areas? Wounds, previous strike, dermatitis, yellow wool, breech wrinkle, dag, sweaty poles, breech wool, anything that's moist wool and skin, urine stain, after birth, anything that's going to keep the skin moist and develop that protein-rich exudate is at risk. Other risk factors we think about is conformation, structure, tail length. We're going to talk about that a bit later. Age and management, lambs and weaners versus mature ewes, because we're applying a classing process. Anytime I think about sheep production systems, I always think there's always a hierarchy of needs or a hierarchy of risk. Think about hierarchy of needs for your twin bearers. They need a lot more energy than a single bearer, but also there's a hierarchy of risk as well. And that's when we think about flies, I think about lambs and unclassed weaners, much higher risk of high risk category. And when we think about, highest, or I suppose most scarcest resource isn't rain, it's your time. When I think about, if I don't have enough time to check everyone, I start at my high risk animals and I move away. Class, unclassed, ewes with different lambing, crutching, shearing dates, and of course protracted lambing periods make it super hard for, using preventative chemicals, spreading out, hard to manage. All these things add to the risk. So there is a way that we can use, sheep scores to help us identify those animals that create the most risk. And there's some really interesting genetic stuff behind this as well. But realistically, when we're thinking about it, it's again, who's at most risk, and can we identify them and either give them high need care, or we get them, vote them off the island. Because we know the whole fly stock story is once we get, a big roll on, more flies lead to more flies. So by attacking the animals who are going to be most susceptible, we're reducing up overall risk in the system. There is a AWI workshop called Classify, which helps, look really a bit of a deep dive into what makes, sheep susceptible to fly strike. But this is the visual soil guide. It's great. I went to LambX the other week. A lot of interesting stuff on udder conformation and how that plays down to lamb survivability. So, really easy runs to have. But, it's really simple, isn't it? We know that lambs with higher breech wrinkle are at higher risk. Same with breech cover, but also our conformation. And I think these are really quite easy. And one of the great opportunities that's coming down the line through EID is, I think it's going to be so easy when you see these animals, get your stick reader, wand it, create a hit list on, one list for the whole year and just a hit list. And it's just a great way we can identify these animals without having to draft off one or two, in the paddock or whatever we're doing, or when we treat them for something. So we talked about, we're gone from the animal. Let's go to the presence of flies, and probably the final condition really is the presence of flies. So, and they need to be there as a result of a successful breeding and hatching event. What they do need is protein. That's what helps them continue the cycle. Less protein available for them, less chance they can get a really good run on. So blowflies have actually got a pretty small radius. They generally stay within 3 kilometers of the hatching location. So this is great because it means that the efforts you do on farm actually can really impact what happens on your farm. Also, the opportunity or the threat there is that because they don't move that far, is that your resistance profile to the chemicals you use for fly management is actually you're dictating, same with worms to a degree, you are dictating what the resistance profile is on your farm. So you get to control, you get a vote in a lot of these things. So what is this all trying to move it through is that we're trying to move into an integrated management approach, and it's trying to put it all together to reduce the number of susceptible sheep, reduce and restrict fly populations as much as we can, and to limit the impact of weather conditions. And again, putting all this together, the toughest thing about biological systems is that 1 + 1 can equal 3. When we get it right, think of reproduction with body condition score. Go the other way, when we get it wrong, 1 + 1 can equal, -1. And we can see that. And fly strike, I think, is one of these great opportunities where we stack these things up together. We can really mitigate our risks and mitigate our losses. We let it get away on us, and we just have to fight this kind of biological compound interest the whole way through the season and into the next year. So what's the secret sauce that, the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices? It's not that secret really, is it? Step number 1, we've got to know when our enemy is most active, and we've got to increase our vigilance on our monitoring and our preparedness. Everyone's farm has a different and unique risk profile. Everyone's farm is always a little bit different, but also different regions of Australia and within New South Wales, just in the different rainfall regions, we have a different risk profile. If you go into Worm Boss, there's actually a fly strike simulator where you can punch in your coordinates, and it will actually give you a bit of a map of, from the historical averages when your highest risk periods are. Again, no surprises. Prevention is better than cure. It's always better to get this and attack it at the start. And again, avoid panic with good preparation. We know this is going to be a big period for flies and worms. Getting a bit of an idea of what's going to happen when, and then use a whole range of tools, to kind of put that together. So how do we think about tools? What have we got in the shed? We've got our short-term strategies, which will be, prevention activities. The treatment of struck sheep. Again, we want to identify those animals because they're breeding a lot of flies. I probably didn't mention it before, but the female can lay like 300 eggs in one hit. So you think one female, it's a 17-day cycle as we go around. So one female, 300, get another 17 days, all those 300 lay 300. And so you can see it's exponential growth. And this is why it's so important to get on the attack there. Pardon me. So, our short-term activities, prevention activities, treatment of struck sheep, get on top of that really early because, like I said, every maggot that goes off that and goes into the soil, has the ability to turn itself into 300 within a month. And again, crisis management, I'd probably put that crisis avoided, and trying to get on the attack and really attack that early. But a longer term strategy is to remove the susceptible sheep. Again, that creates the nexus of risk, reduce the impact of favorable weather, and restrict the fly populations. That's the kind of long-term stuff we're going to talk about. So if I was going to put it into 8 tools, we've got monitoring, crotching and shearing, preventative chemicals, managing scaring, dags and stain, paddock selection, reducing fly populations, classing, selection and joining, and breech modification. And we're going to talk about some of those going forward because we're trying to get really on the attack here. So what to monitor? Realistically, we're thinking about, the monitor the susceptible sheep. And this is what I'm going back to, that hierarchy of needs. Those younger sheep, those unclassed weaners, that's where, you want to focus your efforts and work your way out from there. Again, same story as the single and twin pregnancy. If we've only got so many resources to allocate, we want to allocate to the animals that either can reduce our risk the greatest or provide most return on investment for our time. So regular and rapid identification of fly strike is important to get effective treatment and prevent further fly strike in the flock. Again, it's a little snowflake that turns into the avalanche really quickly. So we want to get on top of that and detect that fly behavior in any fly struck animals as quickly as possible. So a short-term tactical tools, crutching and shearing. Crutching and shearing represent, crutching for the breech, but shearing for the entire body, represent a fantastic free kick. And we typically will get 6 weeks protection from fly strike by using those tactical tools. If we've got a large amount of scaring, then that's probably, in for the crutching story, reduced to 3 weeks. And of course, we can time these events to, consider the high risk periods. So I was talking to a client at Wilcannia, and he tells me they're drying out at the moment, but he's recognised that he's got a fairly long wool length, so he's going in and crutching now because he wants to get ahead of the curve, making sure that those snowflakes, if they do get a bit more rain, don't turn into avalanches as quickly as possible. So, what else can we do? That's the first tool. And second tool, let's talk about some tactical uses. So preventative chemicals, typically they'll work on the fly's nervous system. A variety of chemicals can go from between 4 to 29 weeks. It is very variable. But some preventative chemicals are residual, meaning they can continue to affect the maggots and flies that make contact with them. However, from the time to application, chemicals start to wear off, becoming less effective over time. And that's really important to kind of recognise going forward. So we should really consider the timing of crutching, shearing, and then different chemicals, because there'll be a different, I suppose, application for different wool lengths. So again, there's no surprises with the secret sauce here for effective chemical application. We want to make sure we're using the right chemical for the job. We use the right application method. We apply the right dosage. That's a huge one, and I think sometimes we can get a bit how would I say, frugal, and certainly those getting frugal with, say, dicyclonol, I think is probably one of the biggest reasons, or a significant reason, for the development of resistance. Ensure the appropriate wool length and read and follow instructions. Again, I know that's it sounds simple, but we often don't do it, do we? But this is the whole thing. If we want to get predictable results, we just got to follow the recipe, don't we? I was down in Tasmania last year, and like I'm sure everyone's heard the stories, using firefighter hoses and stuff like that. But we can't get any form of predictable result on a product if we don't follow the way it's designed to be used and executed. So it's important to understand the chemical you'll be using as a preventative, but there's a whole lot of different chemical groups. As we go forward, this is kind of the kind of chemical group, and then there's the active chemical. And as you follow this down, you'll see ceromazine and dicyclonol are in the same family. which is important down the track when we talk about resistance issues. But there's a lot of different families there, and we want to make sure that we're understanding that there's a difference. Now, within that, there's a whole ton of different applications that are available or not available, depending on the chemical. So this is just like a general table, just to give you a bit of a feel. This table and so much of what we're going to talk about is available on, on the web, and we'll give a website as we go through. We've got different label periods that help us get a guide of how well and how long we might expect some protection in the ideal environment. But this is something interesting that, I think a lot about, is that most of these, or a lot of these chemicals we use as preventives, actually kind of get used in the life story as well. And I think that probably one of the interesting innovations that we've seen in the last year is that there's been a new lice-only chemical come to the market, which I think is like fantastic, because now we can start shifting some of these other chemicals that maybe we were using in our lice rotation. And I think we can, let's stick to the lice products to being focused on lice, and let's keep the fly products, the ones that can do both. Let's keep them to the working on the flies, because that's the big enemy that can cause us a ton of damage in our systems. So don't be fooled. I suppose this is the biggest thing, and I was talking to some clients who might be on board yesterday, and we just talked about some of the challenges about going into a rural reseller and seeing so many different brand names on the I suppose the bottle, but not understanding that a lot of the same products are in the same chemical concentration. So that's probably just some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. If you're not really strong in this, there's a ton of advisors out there, and a lot of them are online today. Like, there's a ton of advisors out there who can help you with this and just help sort out this, because there's a ton of different branded products that actually have got the same active. And this is the whole story as we go forward, is we want to make sure we're keeping the enemy guessing, and we want to use a combination of punches throughout the season, not just the same one all the time, because that's how we get really solid resistance developing. So protection periods, what we expect will be, dependent on application methods, the amount of rain that we get. If we get a really wet summer and spring, then we get an amount of chemical washout there. So we've got to be mindful of that if we're getting a lot of rainfall events, that the protection period we'd expect, we've got to be aware that might be kind of getting shandied through. And of course, with some of these chemicals, that the degree of fly pressure might also influence how long we get out of it. I put, sorry for everyone who drives, a red one or a yellow one, but I just put a header in there, because if you're running into a big cropping period coming up for harvest, and I know a lot of producers will kind of step into, it'd be pretty exciting this year for harvest to get a good one on the board. I think long and hard about how do we plan this out so that you're not getting off any, during your absolute key harvesting period, you're not dealing with your susceptible individuals. We want to plan this out so there's no reactive events coming through that absolutely key farming period. Again, ton of advisors who can help you map this out and get on the attack. Because one of the challenges we've seen, I think when I said look at resistance profiles getting around, is that Central West non-seasonal rainfall, we've got some good challenges with resistance. Is that resistance doesn't mean it doesn't work anymore. It just means it doesn't work as well in the general sense. So, what we would see is a shortening of the protection period that's specified on the product labels. But also we might see fly strike in multiple sheep that we've been treated with the same chemicals, rather than just a few. Because, just one or two, we could think, oh, maybe there was, someone jumped a fence or something like that. But when we get a large number of animals, that's when we really got to start looking at it. And I think, that's where we start, again, in our business, we always talk about the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. And so you can definitely use, and there is testing available to see what's happening in your chemicals for your flies population. So it's a fantastic tool. We've used it a bit. I love it. What are our resistance management steps? Trying to think about going forward into the season is, using the range of tools, knowing the chemical groups and rotate where possible, optimizing the number of and timing of the treatments, surprise, surprise, following the label instructions. And then again, we don't want to let the enemy get a foothold in our operation. We want to detect those fly strike animals and kill the maggots as fast as possible. So 3 considerations just for chemical rotation is consider the chemical group that was last applied earlier, either early in this season or from the previous fly season, and where practical, don't go back to back. Our parents always told us don't mix your drinks. In terms of fly management, we always want to mix our drinks. Lice control, this is what I talked about before. Fantastic that we've got another player in the game that can attack the lice, directly and in long wool, which is fantastic. Again, that can shift some of our chemicals we might be using in our lice program, shift them into the to the fly attack team. And then the treatment story is that consider the chemical groups that were last applied to prevent fly strike and avoid using these as the dressings that treat the struck sheep. Again, keep the enemy guessing. On wool.com, fly strike chemicals, and certainly in the Simplify workshop, there is this fly chemical wheel. Everyone loves a wheel. I don't know how many people bring out their Western Australian land planter wheel. Everyone loves that. But I think this plays in exactly the same. It's just a nice, simple tool that helps you kind of understand, when we talked about those families of chemicals, how to work it through. And even if you don't, you get bombarded by the range in the rural reseller. I would even suggest you could even take that in and said, hey, I need something from this family, and let the experts guide you to the different products to make sure you're not, again, doubling it up. So this is kind of a really good, again, nice, simple tool to help you get some of the broad strokes right. So scaring, dags, and staining of the breech also create a moist, warm area that attracts mature flies due to the odors emitted. Okay, so these conditions are ideal for the eggs to hatch into maggots, and a relatively minor accumulation of dags significantly increases the risk of breech struck, particularly when we're combined with breech wrinkle. So reducing breech wrinkle and managing dag will greatly reduce the risk of fly strike. So scaring, the symptoms of intestinal disease, parasites, bacteria, nutritional imbalance, tail length, climatic zone, and age and sensitivity, and I suppose when we put all that thing to scaring story together, it's that what in this environment, we know that scaring will lead to increased risk of fly strike. What in this area can we control and manage? And there's certainly some climatic variations that will come into here. Less than optimal tail length, we'll talk about that. Nutritional imbalances, grazing crops, things like that certainly can influence this as we go through. So parasite control is a controllable, and it's all about, rotating drenches and active chemicals, again, having a plan moving forward. Undertake fecal egg testing. I think in the last 5 years, I think there's been an absolute revolution in our ability to access worm control through fecal egg testing. Like, there wouldn't be too many significant towns that don't have a fecal egg counting machine, either within a rural reseller or a vet, or we've got even clients who've got their own machines on farm. I think our ability to get that data and get that data quickly is so easy now, and I think it's super cost effective. So I think, using, I suppose, regular worm egg counts is super easy tool, and it helps you get it on top of this, letting stuff not get away on you. As a general rule from here, if you're in the Central West, the tableland, it doesn't really matter. If you're having a big spring, I'd be doing it every month as a minimum. We know Barber's Pole can lay 10,000 eggs per day. So we can go from zero to chaos so quickly, which is so important to manage the well-being of our sheep, to keep that under wraps. And of course, use the right chemical for the job when needed. So tail length, suboptimal tail length increases the risk of dag formation, bacterial joint disease, rectal prolapses and cancers. We've kind of seen that, So, basically we want to dock that, at the third or fourth palpable joint so that the vulva is covered when the tail docked when healed. So I would say this regardless of breed for me. It's so important, big influence on the cancers and the rectal prolapses for when we're doing feeding. So important going forward. Why is that? Because that tail length helps anchor some of the muscles that control the kind of the exit door, and allow greater contraction at the bottom there. And also that tail length allows them to kind of channel away any urine and feces to get away from the breech. Because we said before that the longer things are warm and moist, the more flies like to come in. Again, some flies lead to more flies. We talked a little bit before about susceptible individuals, and we talked about how flies don't like the wind, and so then there is on our farms there'll be paddocks with different aspects and different, I suppose, access, if you want to call it, to the prevailing winds, and that's when I think about the hierarchy of needs. Is that if I've got open paddocks with more wind, compared to damp kind of swampy paddocks, then I want to put the most at-risk animals into the most open paddocks, because they're the less risk for our weaners. So less timber, less wet areas. We want to make sure they've got the ability, particularly for susceptible individuals, to be able to dry out as fast as possible as well. And of course, a low worm risk pastures for that scouring risk. Common rules be, avoid grazing them 2 to 5 months, but what probably I've seen kind of develop out is it's really got to be a bit more tactical. And some of these, 2 to 5 months would be, a principle you've got to apply it onto your farm. And I think things are, driving around, running a sheep business, with clients from Blackwater, Bendigo, and into South Australia, and Tasmania. I just know that things are so different. You've got to be available or open to grabbing, here's a principle, let's deploy it in our environment and see how we can control what we can control. So activities that help reduce the fly population is collect and bag your maggots when treating sheep. I know that sounds like a bit of a chore, but again, every maggot that drops off and gets in there can be around in 17 days and can be laying eggs and creating more fly problems. So the more we can attack it when it's still the little snowflake, the less chance they've got into developing into the avalanche. It's pretty easy. Even the kind of wool cuttings and all that kind of stuff all goes into the bag. Just tie it, put it in the sun. A couple of days, it kills all the maggots. Super easy to do. If a sheep dies from fly strike, any Australian sheep blowfly maggots that are well developed can crawl off the carcass into the soil. However, once it's a little bit older, all those older flies have come in and dominated the carcass. But again, when we think about what's the principle, is that protein sources drive fly populations. What can we do to minimize the number of maggots, to reduce the number of protein sources? We should be stepping in and doing that as much as we can, particularly if we're kind of, treating struck sheep in the yards where we're going to get a lot more sheep hanging around. So, we move from there. I know a lot of people are landmarking at the moment. And again, this is all trying to put it together, and breech modification was mentioned as one of those tools. And I suppose I'll just put this up. There is a playbook on how do you manage that. In my head, I always think that, if you're doing landmarking procedures, I would class them as surgical, and then therefore everyone in the sheep industry is a sheep surgeon. What are the principles of, if I'm a surgeon, human surgeon, what are my principles? I maximise hygiene, I minimise stress for my patients, including pain, and I maximise the recovery rate to get them out of the hurt locker. Part of that story is using pain relief products, which are analgesics and antiseptics, and there's a range of products from spray-on, injectable with rings, oral gels, and then, injectable under the skins as well. Interesting enough, in the sheep sustainability framework, I had that read of that the other day. Only 14 to 22% of sheep producers use pain relief for castration, which looks like it hurts. I think that's really, really low. But on the upside and the bright side, and probably a pat on the back to the merino industry, is that 96% of producers reported using spray on pain relief for mulesing. So I think that's a great good news story as well. Obviously, I reckon there's a bit more room to maneuver, but in terms of an industry that's kind of taking steps forward, fantastic to see that kind of high level of using of pain relief, for something that's clearly not that enjoyable. So I suppose we're kind of going all the way around. I'm trying to move really quickly to just kind of plant the seeds of a few different ideas. Again, wool.com has got a ton of resources. I love a good standard operating procedure. And here is one, straight from the web about, well, what do we do about treating the fly strike? It really kind of just revolves around cleaning the strike area, clipping the wool as much as possible, and getting that, skin open. You've got to follow the tracks through, get it open so it can dry out. Because that if it stays moist, even if you put a chemical in moist, it creates still a protein source. We want it to hit the wound to dry out, heal. We want to collect and kill the maggots. Every maggot represents another 300 flies. Put the wool and maggots into a plastic bag, seal it, leave it in the sun. Good riddance. We want to dress the affected area and using chemicals registered for that, and make sure we're doing that appropriately. And then we want to move those animals into a hospital pen. Again, they will create a magnet for more fly activity. So I want to move them to a hospital pen if they're struck, treat them and take care of them. And if they're significantly struck, an advanced strike, and I think they do need antibiotics and pain relief, they need all the love they can get to get them back out of the hurt locker. Guys, we've gone fast and furious on this one. I just put this slide up. This is super hectic, but basically what it shows is that, we've got, the blue bubbles, the dark blue bubbles are, significant factors. Here we've got, I suppose the fly-related factors in that kind of more aqua blue circles, but also we've got, here's all these kind of the variables involved in the whole kind of story of fly strike. I look at this and go, wow, fly strike and that whole interaction of everything that happens on farm leading to fly waves. There's a ton of things happening in there. It's a lot more complex than we think because it's a biological system, and all biological systems are complex. What is the answer to that complexity? Is to control absolutely everything we can possibly control. And that's why AWI has developed a whole range of extension and education products available. It's Fly Time and Demystify are some online resource for you. There's workshops, which is Simplify, which is the holistic crash course in my mind. That's a fantastic one to get to. Classify is when we deep dive on what aspects make the sheep so susceptible. How do we class against that? That's a fantastic one. Stratify is when we look at a strategic angle to fly strike and looking at mulesing and moving to a non-mulesed or a lower fly risk flock. And the latest one that's going to hit the shelves soonly, or it will be a one-to-one face-to-face Amplify, which is where there'll be a list of consultants and advisors who have got a structured way to kind of help you develop fly programs, but also on the long term, how do we move to animals that are less susceptible? Because we said that's one of the key three things. The more we can work there and reduce those numbers of susceptible animals, the less the game can get played by adversary. Guys, gone fast and furious. Hope that's planted some seeds to get in your head on the attack. I think there's a ton of advisors on today, so I think hopefully that's given you some ideas. Now's the time to be engaging with your clients and the vets as well. Engaging, get on the attack, get the word out, because we can make a big difference now. 2 months' time, soil temperature's up, it's going to be all on for worms and flies, and by that stage we'll just be fighting in defense, and the best defense is offense. So good luck. Thank you for joining, and fire away with any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. A great presentation as always, and you're not wrong. We have a beautiful spring day here where I live, which is up in the New England and possibly one of the more colder parts of the state. and certainly warming up ready for flies here already. So yeah, it's definitely topical and time to act right now. So thank you for that great presentation. And if anyone would like any more information about the workshops that AWI have available, please contact us here at AWI Extension New South Wales, and we'll be able to put you in touch with something that's happening in your area. So we have a couple of questions that have come through, but now's your time to ask your questions of Tim while we still have him. He's online now for another 10 or so minutes, however long you keep asking questions. So please utilize that right now. Pop them in the Q&A panel. But I'll go to a question that we received throughout the presentation, Tim, and that was, what's the best chemical to use for baiting? And I'm assuming that is for fly traps.
Oh, geez, that's a tough one. I'd have to take that on notice. My understanding, and Fiona, you might have a different opinion, that my understanding is fly traps haven't proven to be overtly successful. And someone online, if you're an advisor and you know better, please, this is a team sport, jump in. But my understanding is that hasn't been a overtly successful strategy. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't think I've got any clients using fly traps. Fiona, have you got, or someone online got something they could throw into the chat on their experiences?
Yeah, well, welcome to pop anything into the chat. And yes, I agreed. Any fly traps, I believe, come with baits anyway. But yeah, it's very, very localized that you have any effect with it. So
yeah, my understanding is fly traps have just been used as a surveillance tool, not an actual attack mechanism.
Great, thank you. This is a great question that's come through here. Should you keep treated fly-blown sheep away from the rest of the mob until they heal, Tim?
Yep, 100%. And that's what we talked about having that hospital mob, hospital paddock, because they do represent a risk to the rest of the group. So there's almost like twofold, isn't there? We want to get them away from rest of our mob, so we want to avoid the risk, but also we've got to take care of them. So there's three reasons, and the third one is we want to identify them, because there's a reason that they got fly struck, more or less, and so we want to identify them, and we want to make sure that we don't, they don't join us in the kind of their long-term genetic journey. I agree. Great question.
Next question we have, and it's a bit of a long one, Tim, so I can repeat it if you need me to. With limited fly control products on the market and the increasing risk of resistance, threat of resistance, yes, producers may start to want to look at products that protect against flies and also lice. But if you don't have lice, Tim, you probably shouldn't be using this product. So what would you recommend that producers use, and how would they go about selecting the treatment they need?
Is that for treatment or
prevention?
Prevention, yeah, for sure. And how I frame that up is that there'll be we're trying to get a program where we're identifying, like, what are we using them for? When are we using them? And is there an alternative? And that's, like I said before, like, there is an oral product now for lice. And I think that's a fantastic way that we can, typically maybe off the board, you might have used imidacloprid or something like that. And I think that's a great product because that can play, so it backs all the forwards. But now it's in my mind, I'm going, hey, the biggest risk to my business is fly strike. I want to push those chemicals across, and I want to just keep the lice products like thiacloprid, and I just want to use that for lice, and keep, the imidacloprid, which is its brother, just for the fly strike strategy. So that's how I kind of think about it, is just going, what are the products out there that will just do lice? Let's use those up and have a plan for them, because not many people have thought about, in my mind or in my experience, having almost like two different plans. It's kind of like they kind of get shandied. So it's all about going, hey, what can do both? And what is just designed for one species? Let's focus on those ones for the lice, and the flies can be used for the other ones.
Yeah, great advice there, Tim. Thank you. Well, we'll come back to, and I'll check the Q&A just before we close up. but that's all the questions we have for now. So I'd just like to take this opportunity, Tim, to thank you once again for joining us at AWI Extension New South Wales. It's always just a treat to have you on board, and you've always got a fantastic presentation to give. So we're really spoiled to have you. Thanks for joining us.